한국문학 작품은 좀 그 속도가 조금 더디지 않나라는 생각은 들거든요. 그래서 한국문학 작품들이 많이 활발하게 소개가 되었으면 좋겠다라고 생각하고 아마 곧 그렇게 되지 않을까 생각합니다. 네.
지금 여기 있다 영원히 살아 숨 쉴 줄 난 어디에나 있다 나는 살아있는 사람 우리가 살아
The Korean wave is drawing more fans from all over the world. Local consumer prices continue to hover at the 2% census rate in April. Turning to robots to allow the visually impaired the chance to better indulge in cultural experiences. Like the number of hybrid cars are registered in South Korea has surpassed 2 million with this locally developed Yuri rocket.
Arirang.
It's June 5th here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with the stories making the headlines at this hour. Starting with the launch of South Korea's Lee Jae-myung administration. President Lee is set to hold his first cabinet meeting on Thursday after having convened the first meeting of his Emergency Economic Evaluation Task Force as his first executive order on Inauguration Day. South Korea's Korea Hydro and Nuclear Power has sealed a final contract to build nuclear reactors in the Czech Republic, following the lifting of a court injunction that had blocked the deal. The $18.6 billion deal will be South Korea's first overseas nuclear power plant contract in 16 years. U.S. President Donald Trump held a 75-minute phone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin on Wednesday, only to confirm that Russia will respond to Ukraine's drone attacks on air bases in Russia on Sunday, further moving away from immediate peace in Ukraine. The new South Korean leader Lee Jae-myung got to work immediately after being elected on Wednesday, which means he began his duties at the presidential office in Yongsan, where he also named individuals for some of his administration's key posts. Our correspondent Oh Soo-young starts us off.
Day one of the Lee Jae-myung administration began at the break of dawn, with the new South Korean leader's duties beginning upon the National Election Commission's confirmation of his presidency. As he stepped out for his first commute from his home in Gyeonggo district, Incheon, Ian First Lady Kim Hae-kyung spent about 10 minutes shaking hands with supporters and expressing their gratitude. As per tradition for all newly elected leaders, President Lee made a visit to the Seoul National Cemetery to honor the nation's war dead and heroes before heading to the National Assembly for his inauguration ceremony. Despite his push to move the presidential office back to the palatial grounds of Cheongwade, undoing his predecessor's relocation to the city centre, Lee launched his administration in Yongsan. Awaiting his arrival, the flag bearing the presidential phoenix was once again raised as of early Wednesday. Staying true to his pledge to begin his duties straight away, the president personally announced his key appointments.
존경하는 국민 여러분, 지금 우리는 경제와 민생 회복 그리고 지속 가능한 성장의 토대를 다시 세워야 할 시점입니다. 저는 오늘 국민에 대한 충직함과 책임 그리고 실력을 갖춘 인사들과 함께 국민 주권 정부의 새 출발을 시작합니다.
In a briefing to reporters, he named four-time lawmaker Kim Min-seok as Prime Minister nominee and as National Intelligence Service Director, former Unification Minister Lee Jong-seok, who's an experienced negotiator and policy expert in inter-Korean relations. These two positions require parliamentary approval. However, senior aides working directly with the president assumed their positions right away, without a separate vetting process. He appointed as his chief presidential secretary lawmaker Kang Un-sik, one of the key strategists behind his election campaigns. Former ambassador to Russia Wi Song-lak now heads the National Security Office as National Security Advisor. Former Army General Hwang In-kwon leads the Presidential Security Service, tasked with protecting the president and his family. Professor-turned-politician Kang Yoo-jung has become the presidential spokesperson. As for future ministerial appointments, President Lee said he would like to take his time to gather opinions from the public, the ruling and opposition parties and members of the media. He further said restructuring the presidential office won't happen today or tomorrow, as his administration will focus first on emergency measures for economic recovery. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
President Lee held the first meeting of his Emergency Economic Evaluation Task Force on the night of his inauguration, underscoring his pledge to focus on repairing the economy first. Creating the task force as his first executive order, Lee convened an emergency meeting with vice ministers and working-level officials from the Ministries of Finance, SMEs, and Transport for 2 hours and 20 minutes. According to the presidential office, he listened to opinions on trade issues with the U.S. and discussed measures concerning people's livelihoods. He also inquired about the fiscal capacity for a supplementary budget and its potential stimulative effects on the economy. Now, on Thursday today, he will hold his first cabinet meeting. The full cabinet had expressed intentions to resign upon his inauguration, but he rejected the move, only accepting the resignation of Justice Minister Park Sung-jae. So the new president's first executive order was launching an emergency task force to tackle urgent economic challenges and make the daily lives of the people better in tangible ways. Our economics correspondent Lee Soo-jin takes a closer look.
South Korea's newly elected president Lee Jae-myung is swiftly moving to deliver on a key campaign pledge, revival of the economy. His spokesperson announced on Wednesday that President Lee had signed his first executive order.
On June 4, 2025, his first day in office, President Lee Jae-myung signed his first executive order, calling for the establishment of an emergency economic task force.
This comes as growth projections for South Korea's economy have been revised downward by both domestic and foreign institutions. The Bank of Korea just last week slashed its GDP growth forecast for this year to 0.8% from 1.5% in its economic outlook report. And the OECD on Tuesday lowered South Korea's 2025 growth forecast to 1%, down 0.5 percentage points from its earlier projection. While it is yet unclear who will take on the dual role of finance and deputy prime minister, the appointee is expected to lead the task force in overseeing pressing economic issues. This includes overseeing a planned economic supplementary budget amounting to 30 trillion won or $22 billion to boost domestic demand. But as the ruling Democratic Party is expected to maintain a majority in the National Assembly for the next 3 years until the 2028 general election, the new administration is likely to face fewer hurdles in carrying out its policy agenda. The new administration will also have to navigate high-stakes negotiations with the Trump administration. Korea and the U.S. held high-level trade talks in April where the two countries agreed to reach a comprehensive agreement dubbed the July Package by July 8th, the day that the 90-day pause on Trump's reciprocal tariff rates on foreign nations is set to expire. The Ministry of Economy and Finance is also expected to be restructured as East since his candidacy has pledged to transfer the Finance Ministry's budgeting role to a separate body. The ministry currently oversees both economic policy and budget allocation, but Lee argues this concentrates too much power in one place. The separation of the budgeting function is expected to allow other ministries to gain more autonomy and accountability over their spending, while allowing the finance ministry to focus more on coordinating overall economic policy. 이수진, Arirang News.
North Korea's state media on Thursday reported on the result of South Korea's presidential election for the first time, noting that Lee Jae-myung was elected South Korea's new president. So the North kept the reports brief and short. Let us discuss more with Dr. Bruce Bennett. Welcome back, Dr. Bennett.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
So the Korean Central News Agency briefly said Lee Jae-myung, a candidate from the Democratic Party, was elected as South Korea's president. Why no big reaction from the North, do you think?
Well, fundamentally, in this kind of case, we just don't know. But if I were to speculate, I would say that Kim Jong-un is trying his very best to avoid creating any kind of interest in outside information. Kim wants to cut off, to an extent possible, the absorption of his elites of outside information. So he's going to make even an important event like this a very small issue.
Well, President Lee Jae-myung, he pledged to push for peace and dialogue. That's not a surprise, saying peace is cheaper than war. Now, he specifically said he'll make sure to discover ways to coexist with North Korea without war. What does that mean? Does it mean Seoul will reach out to Pyongyang first?
Well, I think he will try to reach out to Pyongyang. The problem is that Kim Jong-un has said that he wants no negotiations with his principal enemy, which is South Korea. So either Kim changes his mind and takes a new approach, which seems not very likely, or President Lee and President Trump need to get together and come up with a new approach.
You know, bringing North Korea back to dialogue won't be an easy project, considering how inter-Korean ties have been, so frosty for the past few years under the former Yoon Suk-yeol administration. Now, how do you think the new South Korean President Lee Jae-myung will, try to bring North Korea back to the discussion table?
Well, Kim Jong-un has resisted any kind of negotiations. That could be a negotiating ploy in which he's trying to get concessions up front. That's pretty much what he's been asking for from the United States, and he did. He got President Trump to say that North Korea is a nuclear power. That was a pretty substantial concession. But Kim didn't make any big deal about it and didn't respond positively. So I think it's going to be very hard to come up with any kind of concession within reason that doesn't look like we're being too extreme in order to get him to the negotiating table. We may have to take a very different approach and give him specific proposals in a carrot and stick kind of manner. If you do this, we'll give you this. If you don't, then you're going to pay this penalty.
under certain conditions, maybe. Now, Dr. Bennett, I do have to note that the shift in the change in the South Korean leadership comes during the second term of office for U.S. President Donald Trump. And, U.S. President Donald Trump is currently preoccupied with his own matters, tariffs, the Ukraine war, Gaza war, so many things. But Trump will one day reach out to North Korea, or he has already reached out to North Korea, I'm sure. But how can the Lee Jae-myung government make sure, South Korea is not left out there?
Well, there's been some press today about President Lee trying to contact and talk on the phone with President Trump in the next few days. And I think that's exactly the right approach. President Lee needs to make President Trump understand that he is very interested in what President Trump thinks. He wants to cooperate with him. He's prepared to be responsive to what President Trump wants. And in that regard, he's got to pay attention to the fact that Secretary of Defense Hegseth just said at the Shangri-La dialogue that he's looking for the countries in Asia to increase their defense budgets. President Lee plans to increase his national government budget. Part of that could be an increase in his defense budget as part of a supplemental application. And that would probably catch President Trump's attention and make him think that President Lee is listening and being responsive.
Well, Dr. Bennett, North Korea's nuclear and missile ambitions are growing only day by day as we are speaking now with the regime's troop deployment to the Ukraine crisis. Now, how can the Lee and Trump administrations, put their heads together against North Korea's ever-growing military threats? I'm sure U.S. troop withdrawal from South Korea can absolutely not be an option, right?
Well, one would think that that's not an option. It doesn't serve the interests of either of our countries. Even for the U.S., even if we focus primarily on China as an adversary, what place is there other than South Korea that's closer to China and gives us more presence to deal with the Chinese threat?
Right.
So it's in our interest to cooperate. The question is how. And there are ways. One does not have to sit down at the negotiating table to negotiate. One can put out unilateral proposals to North Korea and say, if you close the uranium enrichment facility you showed us last year and put it under IAEA inspections, we're prepared to give you some relief of sanctions. If you don't, we're prepared to take more extreme actions because we want to reduce the nuclear threat you're growing that even China's not very happy about and would like to see reduced.
Right. Dr. Bennett, thank you so much for your insights and connecting with us this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
South Korea's economy contracted in the first quarter of this year, primarily due to sluggish construction investment and exports. Now, data from the Bank of Korea on Thursday showed that the country's GDP from January to March shrank by 0.2% on quarter, spurred by domestic and international economic uncertainties. Now, this was mainly due to a 3.1% fall in construction investment and a 0.6% decrease in exports. South Korea has signed a nuclear power plant project with the Czech Republic, which had been put on hold after a rival bidder had filed an injunction. Now, this multi-billion-dollar deal will be the first for Seoul in 16 years. Our An Sung-jin has the details.
The nuclear plant deal between the Czech Republic and South Korea has finally been sealed. Representatives from the Dukovany 2 power plant and the Korea Hydro and Nuclear Power on Wednesday signed final contracts to build 2 new nuclear power reactors in the Czech Republic. Czech Prime Minister Petra Fiala said on the same day all doubts and legal obstacles that prevented the nuclear power plant project from being launched had been removed. The signing of the deal came only hours after the Czech High Court lifted an injunction barring the deal from closing. The two parties were originally to sign the contract on May 7th until the losing bidder EDF of France had filed for and won an injunction, delaying the project's timeline. However, Dukovany and KHNP appealed the ruling and the court declared that the injunction was unverifiable. The $18.6 billion deal will result in the expansion of the Dukovany nuclear site with the construction of two 1,000 megawatt units, with the first to be completed by 2036. This deal is the first such project for KHNP in Europe and the company's first overseas project since a deal made with the UAE in 2009. According to pundits, the deal proves South Korea's technical skills and economic feasibility for nuclear plants, while they also say it could be a turning point for Seoul's nuclear plant expansion into the European market. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
U.S. President Donald Trump says he held phone talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin on Wednesday. However, Trump says the discussions would not lead to immediate peace in Ukraine. Lee Seung-jae has more.
U.S. President Donald Trump took to his Truth Social on Wednesday, saying he held phone talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin. According to Trump, the two leaders discussed Ukraine's recent drone attacks against a Russian airfield, with Putin saying he was obligated to respond to the weekend attacks. The U.S. president noted that the 75-minute-long conversation with his Russian counterpart would not immediately lead to an end to the war in Ukraine. The phone talks between the two come as Trump said last week that he would be able to see within 2 weeks whether Putin was serious about agreeing to a ceasefire deal. Meanwhile, the chance at a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine seems to be getting bleaker, as Putin accused Ukraine of terrorism and disrupting peace talks. During a televised government meeting on Monday, Putin shot down Ukraine's call for an unconditional ceasefire, saying that Kyiv's leadership has resorted to terrorist attacks to intimidate Russia. Putin said that he cannot negotiate with those who rely on terror or with terrorists, adding that a break from a military action would only allow Ukraine to gather more Western weapons and prepare other terrorist attacks. His remarks came in response to a series of explosions that allegedly caused bridge collapses in Russia over the weekend, including one that derailed a passenger train, killing 7 people. Despite this, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky on Wednesday proposed an unconditional ceasefire with Russia until a summit with Putin is held. He also proposed possible venues for the meeting, including Istanbul, Switzerland, and the Vatican. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Pope Leo XIV and Russian President Vladimir Putin also held phone talks on Wednesday, with the war in Ukraine part of their discussion. According to the director of the Holy See Press Office, Matteo Bruni, the Pope and Putin discussed humanitarian issues as well as the need for aid where necessary. The Pope called for a gesture from Moscow that would favor peace, stressing the need for dialogue to create a positive context between the parties and seek solutions to the conflict. The Pope and the Russian president also discussed ongoing efforts for prisoner exchanges.
Good morning, I'm Choi Ji-hee, and this is The World Now. The United States has vetoed a United Nations Security Council draft resolution that called for an immediate, unconditional, and permanent ceasefire in Gaza. On Wednesday, the U.S. exercised its veto power to block a UN Security Council resolution that demanded an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and the unrestricted delivery of humanitarian aid to the region. All 14 other Security Council members supported the draft resolution. Acting U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Dorothy Shea, defended the veto, stating that the resolution failed to condemn Hamas for its October 7, 2023 attack on Israel, did not call for the group's disarmament, nor its withdrawal from Gaza. She said, "We would not support any measure that fails to condemn Hamas and does not call for Hamas to disarm and leave Gaza." The U.S. also vetoed the last Security Council resolution on Gaza in November. Russia said on Wednesday that its Crimean Bridge remains fully operational with no damage. This comes after Ukraine detonated explosives on the strategically significant bridge. In the early hours of Tuesday, Ukraine's security service said it conducted a coordinated underwater attack on the Crimean Bridge, deploying explosives equivalent to 1,100 kilograms of TNT. The SBU released footage showing a blast beneath the bridge, claiming severe damage. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov acknowledged this explosion, but stated nothing was damaged. The bridge is working, dismissing Ukraine's claims of structural harm. This was Ukraine's third attack on the bridge since Russia's full-scale war began in 2022. The bridge is considered a significant military supply route for Russian forces in Crimea. Bulgaria will become the 21st nation to adopt the euro at the start of next year after receiving approval from the European Central Bank and the European Commission on Wednesday. The decision follows Bulgaria's fulfillment of all convergence criteria, including inflation control, fiscal stability, and exchange rate alignment. Bulgaria's prime minister hailed the approval as a milestone, emphasizing its potential to bolster foreign investment and deepen Bulgaria's integration into the European Union. However, pro-Russian groups protested, expressing concerns over national sovereignty and potential worsening poverty and inflation. Finally, Nintendo's highly anticipated Switch 2 gaming console is poised to exceed initial sales forecasts as it prepares for its global release on June 5th. The company projects sales of 15 million units by March 2026, but analysts suggest the number will exceed that. Pre-orders have sold out rapidly worldwide, with Japan alone receiving over 2.2 million applications. Despite the $449.99 price point, consumers are enthusiastic about the Switch 2's enhanced features, including a larger LCD screen and improved processing power.
Today marks Bangjong, the third of summer's seasonal terms, and true to the season, it's going to be quite warm this afternoon. Most parts will see summer warmth sticking around through the weekend. And also the skies will be mostly clear nationwide with clean air blowing in. Our air quality will be good. And with a gentle breeze, it almost feels like autumn rather than spring thanks to clear blue skies we've had lately. But strong sunlight will boost UV rays during the hottest parts of the day, so wear hats or carry UV umbrellas to protect yourselves. And this afternoon's Seoul will reach 27 degrees, Daejeon, Gwangju topping out at 28 degrees. But at least the humidity won't be high, so the heat will not feel overwhelming, and it will cool down quickly once the sun sets. It will be mostly clear across the country with afternoon summer warmth through next week, excluding Jeju, where rain is in the forecast this weekend.
That is all we have for this morning. Arirang News will be back at 5 p.m. Korea time.
천안에 가면 재밌다 이거. 글로벌 K 컬처 세계 속에 꽃 피우다.
2025 천안 K컬처 박람회.
플라스틱 사실 편리하잖아요. 저조차도 활동을 하고 있지만 플라스틱을 사용할 정도로 생활에 많이 있다고 생각을 하는데요. 플라스틱을 대체할 수 있는 걸 계속해서 찾고 플라스틱이 아닌 다른 것을 사용하는 게 일상의 습관이 될 수 있도록 하는 것이 좀 중요하다고 생각을 해서 참새클럽 캠페인을 중점으로 활동하고 있습니다. 저희는 HDP랑 PP라는 두 가지 재질의 플라스틱을 모으고 있습니다. 보통 음식류에 사용되기 때문에 배달용기나 이런 곳에서 많이 볼 수 있고, 그리고 두 번째로는 저희가 업사이클 가공을 할 때 가장 유독물질이 덜 나오는 물질이기 때문입니다. 플라스틱을 많이 모으고 많이 제작하는 것이 목적이 아니다 보니까 저희는 시민분들한테 플라스틱 기부받고 리워드를 드리는 게 아니라 모아주신 플라스틱이 이렇게 재활용됐다는 걸 알리기 위해서 하는 프로젝트여가지고 이걸 약간 기부가 아닌 돌려드리는 개념으로 지금 하는 규칙을 사용하고 있는 것 같습니다. 불편한 거예요. 사실 이 플라스틱을 실제로 사용하는 걸 모으고 이걸 세척해서 가져오시고 하는 과정이 이 불편함을 사실 해주고 계신 것만으로도 저희는 되게 감사하죠. 나아가서 플라스틱을 사용하지 않을 수 있는 방법을 내는 것이 저희의 숙제이고요. 그리고 가장 중요한 건 이런 자원순환 활동에 있어서 시민 참여가 어떻게 얼마나 중요한 키워드로 적용이 되는지를 계속 말씀을 드리고 싶어요. 그래서 시민 참여 가이드를 조금 내는 게 저희의 목표이자 바람이라고 말씀드릴 수 있습니다. 나는 플라스틱을 순환시키는 그리너다.
We're here to bring a new type of news show. New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation. Bring news just for you. It's Thursday, June 5th here in Seoul. I'm Song Yujin and you're watching News Generation. Joining us today is Cheska Dainha.
Happy June.
Happy June and happy Thursday. And Yuwon Bin.
Good morning.
Good morning. Now both are here to speak on behalf of those in their 20s and 30s. So we're going to move on to our main discussion of the day right away. Take a look at the screen to find out more on today's topic.
After months of political uncertainty following former President Yoon Suk-yeol's surprise declaration of martial law last December, South Korea has officially elected a new president who will lead the nation for the next 5 years. Today on News Generation, we're going to focus on what young people expect from the incoming administration.
So we have been covering this news day and night over the past 2 days, I guess. We are going to talk about the results of the 21st presidential election today here on NewsGen. So starting off, I want to ask our panelists, did you vote in this election? And if you did, anything that stood out to you?
Yeah, I most certainly did. And I went to my registered address, so it wasn't a pre-vote, it was on the day of. And it was actually very quiet and streamlined, which meant a lot of people had already pre-voted. And there were actually a lot of elderly and older people, so I felt quite a bit out of place trying to take a photo. But I took a quick snapshot of the banner left. I was in and out in less than 10 minutes. And I also saw a lot of minivans and trucks that were driving by to encourage voters to vote. It was very local friendly sighting. And I actually saw from my friends' social media, as you can see from the footage, that they take a lot of these, shots to show that they have been to voting, and they would upload it on social media, either on photo cards or on their hands.
Right.
So this is definitely becoming a trend, and I unfortunately didn't jump on that trend bandwagon just yet. Yeah.
But maybe next time you could.
I hopefully. Yeah. I was a bit self-conscious trying to take a snapshot of myself.
Well, I also voted on the election day, which was Tuesday, June 3rd, and just like Cheska, there weren't a lot of people lined up, but from my colleagues who actually participated in early voting, they said that they waited for like half an hour to an hour almost. So I think that early voting was really big this year.
Yeah.
And I think that we recorded the second highest early voting rate since it was first introduced in 2014. So yeah, now to you, Wonbin. Did you vote on election day?
Absolutely, I did vote as well. I voted on the election day, so June 3rd. And as a citizen who did all of his service as a Korean, including the military service, I voted and I uploaded a photo on my social media. Yes, I did hop on the trend.
Photo.
Yes, and I went to the voting. I went to the voting station.
Oh, there's the
there it is. It was in the morning, so I put the cap on, so with the stamp as well.
You're very MZ, Robin.
I'm trying to be. Yeah, I went there in the morning, and the polling station was very accessible and close by, just about 5 minutes away by walk from my house. And I did have a pretty similar experience as Cheska. Not many people, which is very surprising for me, and came out in less than 5 minutes. And one thing to mention is that this vote will be quite memorable for me because as it is my first vote as a regular citizen. My last presidential vote was during my military service, and I have to say the Tuesday's experience was much more pleasant than I expected.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
And another big part of election results is not only the result itself, but also how many people actually turned out to cast their ballot. So we're now going to talk about a bit more on that. So I want to ask you about the voter turnout, Cheska, and how that compares to the figures of previous presidential elections.
Yeah, this is really interesting, and Wonbin will elaborate a bit more on the figures, but this election actually had the highest voting record ever, and one of the major contributing factors must be the fact that we've been through martial law declaration as well as the presidential impeachment that happened earlier this year, which I think sort of heightened the interest of political involvement. Now, this also indicates an increased rate of voting participation by those in their 20s and 30s, but there was something very interesting. So there was a gender divide among this particular age group when it came to voting records. So most women voted for the Democratic Party and the most men voted for the Conservative, and both 20s and 30s and females and male, they had a more vested interest in the third-party candidate, Lee Jae-myung.
Right. So the voter turnout for this presidential election was the highest in almost 3 decades. So Wonbin, could you please give us the exact number, and also would you say that this turnout met initial expectations?
Of course. So it definitely did meet the initial expectations because many expected voter turnout rate among young people to increase this year. And while the final numbers aren't out yet, there are strong indicators showing that the MZ turnout likely rose along with the overall national turnout. Now, if we look at the overall national turnout, we definitely had one of the elections with the highest voting rates, coming in at 79.4%. And this number broke the record in 28 years. And if we look into the past couple of elections, the voting rate was 77.1% in 2022 and 77.2% in 2017. Now, this might sound like a small difference, but a 2% point of difference means roughly 1 million additional vote counts. So it is hard to say that it's negligible. We did have a big increase in the voter turnout.
All right, so we've taken a look at the overall voter turnout. We're now going to focus on the big result, which is who is the winner, the next leader of South Korea. So for our international viewers who are unfamiliar with who the new president is, we're going to tell you a bit more about President Lee Jae-myung. So why don't you start us off, Cheska?
Absolutely. So now having won the 21st presidential election of South Korea, Lee Jae-myung is a member of the Democratic Party, 더불어민주당, here in South Korea. He ran for the 20th presidential election in the past as well, but had lost to his predecessor. Now, in this particular election, he won this election with a 49.42% voting rate, and he had previously served as mayor of Seongnam from 2010 and the governor of Gyeonggi province from 2018 to 2021.
And walk us through a bit more on Lee Jae-myung's life, Wonbin.
Yeah, so to give a bit more of an explanation on his personal storyline, President Lee Jae-myung was born in poverty in 1963, which is a time when Korea was still one of the world's poorest countries. So instead of studying, he spent his childhood working in factories and factories to support his family. But later, he made a bold decision to pursue education and secure a better future. He eventually entered law school and began his career as a human rights lawyer and a civic activist. Now, with his party holding 171 seats in the National Assembly, his presidency is expected to come with one of the strongest powers in the recent Korean history.
And you just saw the footage of President Lee Jae-myung's first day in office and his inauguration ceremony, and he gave a speech which really where he laid out his vision for the next 5 years. And I remember that in our pre-election episode, we introduced some of the major pledges made by the three leading candidates, especially in areas that mattered most to young people. So today we're going to shift your focus entirely to what the new president has in mind. So Cheska, what are some of the key pledges that were made by President Lee Jae-myung when he was a presidential candidate?
Yes, so I obviously had a very vested interest in what he had to say for our generation in particular, and also single households. So one of the pledges made were plans to expand policies for single-person households and young adults, with a focus on developing integrated housing work platforms near workplaces and offering a tailored public housing and monthly rent support for youth, which, if and when actually executed quite promptly, I think would be incredibly important and helpful to a lot of young people, because this is an issue that we've talked about a lot here in New Zealand as well, right? And the government also plans to introduce, quote, Youth Future Savings Program. Now, this program will ease the burden of university tuition fees and expand the eligibility of student loan interest exemptions. And I think these are some of the pledges that I think a lot of viewers, especially in those in their 20s and 30s, would be very, very interested in.
Right, I definitely think that economic policies are at top of mind for many of the voters here in Korea, because we all know that the economy is not doing really well, has not been really doing well, especially since the political chaos since last December's martial law declaration. So what could be some other key policies that President Lee Jae-myung presented?
Another standout pledge is, excuse me, the expansion of job training programs directly linked to hiring by global companies in order to activate the job market a little bit more. And the new administration also plans to offer financial support for young people actively searching for jobs, helping to ease the pressure during the job hunt and to give them a stronger start in the workforce as well.
Anything you'd like to add more, Cheska?
I think most of the things that we discussed have sort of been related to finance. And I think, as we will see more in the later, I hope, in the interviews when you went out into the streets, I think a lot of people have a vested interest in how we can be more, you know, sort of have this barrier and protection against our livelihood. So in terms of the youth programs and the single households, I think those are the things that a lot of people are paying attention to.
Definitely. And and we are also going to hear more perspectives. Before we hear more on that, as a young voter yourself, you guys both participated in this presidential election. I want want to ask you, among all these key policies and campaign pledges, which stood out to you most?
I think there were several areas that really stood out to me in both legal, environment, but also, as we talked about, in my work and career as well. So just to go through them really quickly, one of them was to initiate protective order system against hatred crimes that were happening a lot, and violent crimes, including dating and relationship violence, which has been happening quite a lot recently. And government plans to introduce even protective measures for victims as well. Now, on Labour, this is something really important. He pledged to create a supportive and fair society for working women. And this was also a topic we discussed a lot here in News Generation, right? Gender equality. And on top of that, the government will actually introduce initiatives like 4.5-day work.
Right.
Which is quite exciting if implemented, because it will reduce the average working hours below the OECD average. And also important, I think, was the climate and the environmental initiatives, which is, in this time of age, I think is absolutely critical as we're heading into probably one of the hottest summer of the history. Yeah,
absolutely.
Again, of the history to set record. Yeah.
What kind of drew your attention, Wonbin?
I focused more on the economic pledges and the campaigns. So I have two. The first one is the 4.5 workday week that Jessica just mentioned, and this really did give me some food for thought. Like we just discussed, it's great and obviously ideal on surface. However, it does make me think how likely and how practical is this to happen in the near future? Because during the presidential debate, President Lee Jae-myung strongly argued that this reduction of working hours must be done without any deduction in salary. However, we didn't see any specific details or any roadmaps on how to do that at the moment. And there must be a lot of compromises from the employers and the companies, and I definitely look forward to seeing how the president will initiate this pledge. And now the second one is the AI investment pledge of investing 100 trillion won, or approximately 70 billion won, into the AI industry. Now, it is the one that I'm most hopeful and at the same time concerned about, because a huge investment could be great, but just pouring in money won't magically create a Korean ChatGPT that will serve the Korean citizens. We need a real vision, a solid technical fundamentals, and the right talents to make this actually happen. And at the moment, Korea doesn't have any standout AI companies like we see in the US or North America. So I'm really curious and optimistic about how the new president will initiate this plan and build a big, strong AI industry in Korea.
The president indeed has a lot on his plate.
He does.
And a very ambitious vision.
Yeah.
Now, to hear more perspectives, Arirang News actually went out to meet young voters and hear what they want from the new administration. We'll be right back after this Vox Pop.
요새 쉬었음 청년들이 굉장히 사회 문제로 대두되고 있는데 그 부분에 대한 해결이 가장 먼저 이루어져야 될 거라고 생각합니다.
저는 일단 각자가 말하는 정책에 대해서 집중하고, 그래도 5년이라는 길다면 길고 짧다면 짧은 시간 동안 본인이 말하는 거에 대해서 잘 지켜가는 정부가 되었으면 좋겠습니다.
기후와 관련해서는 조금 더 재생에너지나 뭐 이런 쪽에 조금 더 관심을 가지고 탈원전 정책에 조금 더 관심을 가지는 그런 정부가 되었으면 좋겠습니다.
대학 서열화를 끝내고 그리고 사교육 시장을 줄이는 방향으로 좀 더 평등한 교육 정책을 위해서 애써야 되지 않나 이런 생각을 갖고 있습니다.
누가 돼도 상관은 없지만 그 공약을 하셨더라면 하나라도 지켜주는 게 있었으면 좋겠어요. 아무래도 자영업 쪽에 있다 보니까 자영업자 쪽에 조금 더 신경을 써줬으면 좋을 것 같아요.
일단 기본적으로 주거 안정이 좀 제대로 이루어졌으면 하는 바람입니다.
없는 분들을 좀 생각해서 서로가 나눔의 실천을 했으면 좋겠어요.
아무래도 제가 이제 30대 초반이다 보니까 이제 결혼 이런 관련해서 정책들이 물론 지금도 잘 나오고 있는 것 같은데 아직도 청년들이 좀 결혼을 준비하는 데 있어서 어려움을 겪고 있기 때문에 결혼 문제에 있어서 좀 이제 정책 같은 것도 좀 더 많이 완화되고 대출 규제라든지 이런 것들 많이 좀 풀어졌으면 좋겠다라는 생각이 있습니다.
Okay, you just came back after watching the Vox Pop. So building on what we just heard, what would you say are the top priorities that young Koreans want the new president to focus on? I mean, there were a lot, but what kind of really stood out to you?
In a funny way, I was kind of mildly happy that there were some issues that they talked about that I mentioned in what I was interested in, so climate, like labor and finance related. But I think all of it kind of sums up with much more trust in the government, because I think one of the interviewers said, I don't care who gets elected, I think what's important is the promises.
Yeah, he keeps his promises.
The pledges, actually get done and executed, because that's what we're voting in the democratic society for. We want those promises made. And according to a survey conducted last year, it was said that less than 30% of the young people in their 20s and 30s said they had trust in the government. And quite sadly, the figure was even lower for the National Assembly that is supposed to be representing us. I think it was not even reaching 20% at the most. And it can be a combination of multiple factors and incidents, including the conflict and disharmony among the political parties, and also some problems that still remain very complex, such as housing issues, inflations that directly affect the livelihood of the young generation. And having seen politicians prioritize their party dominance rather than actually tackling these issues and creating policies, I think a lot of youth have either lost faith or have been disappointed in the past. So I think the top priority among any pledges or any policy is that at least show the united front to move the country forward beyond partisan interest to serve the people, including all of us.
And keeping your promises, right?
Exactly, because they're all really great promises.
Yeah.
If executed promptly and properly.
And we'll keep an eye on.
Yeah, that's our civic duty. Yeah.
What do you think, Wonbin?
To give a bit more of a further explanation, like we've just seen in the interview, there are still many social issues that has to be resolved and addressed in Korea. For young people, honestly, the biggest concern is simply making a living. Korea right now, we're living in a low growth economy with fewer quality jobs, and that's making things especially tough for the younger generation who has less money and less assets. So naturally, job creation and economic revitalization are the top priorities and the top things that most young generations are asking for. Young Koreans also want a stronger welfare system that leaves no one behind, and they expect real action against corruption. And given recent political tensions, there's also a strong desire to protect and strengthen the democratic values as well. And the last one is getting a safe living space. It was mentioned multiple times in the interview as well. But just like other countries in the world, Korea is experiencing a very steep rise in price of houses. And honestly, it's devastating for the young generations and young Koreans who don't own a house. And many around me and many students who tell me they're just simply giving up to save money to buy a house. And since housing is directly linked to the basic human desires, many young generations are hoping for this problem to be alleviated as soon as possible.
A lot of priorities.
Yes. Maybe I'm asking too much here, but...
Well, you can always ask for it.
Well, president is no easy seat.
Of
that's
course.
For sure.
I think it's one of the hardest jobs in the world.
Most difficult job, I think, in the world, to be honest. And it takes a lot of not just responsibilities, but also a lot of expectations and needs of the people. So I do hope that there's a lot of blessing in the road for him to actually execute the pledges.
Absolutely. So we're now going to find out what our viewers think. We also asked our viewers the same question in a poll on our Arirang News YouTube channel. We asked them, what do you expect the most from your new president? And here are the results. 56% answered job creation and economic recovery, followed by crackdown on corruption, expanded social welfare, last but not least, strengthening democracy. All right, so we're going to end our show today on a bright note, should I say, because the new administration is just getting started. It's day 2 of the new Lee Jae-myung administration. So what role do you think we, as both young people, the younger generation, and also voters of a democratic society could play in the next 5 years and more years to come?
Yeah, that's a very great question. First of all, I was quite proud and happy to see the growing involvement and vested interest of our generation in political affairs.
Yeah, we're seeing more political engagement.
Right, and we even had the highest voting record in 28 years. I think that's quite remarkable. And, that actually shows that we are moving more into the democratic society where people are making their voices heard. And even seeing actually candidates that represent youth and in many different issues, I think was quite interesting. And I know that sometimes it can get very difficult to be involved when our direct livelihoods are at stake, because sometimes political affairs seem far away when I'm just trying to make a living and pay my rent, including myself too. But sometimes I think it's really important to actually take time to research at least one or two issues that I, as a civic duty, to be interested in and make our voices heard, because they are there to represent us, right? So if we make our voices heard, more people will benefit from that. So I think that can be a starting point.
Check and balance. What about you, Wonbin?
Well, I have some things to say. Well, first of all, as a young voter and as someone who wasn't really interested in politics before this presidential election, I can confidently say that this election did teach me a great lesson. And I think I can kind of reflect or represent a lot of young generations because I've learned that it's important to know the potential candidates or the leaders and the key individuals in politics so you can make the right decision when you need to make it. Like having your own political stance and having debates with other people's that's all okay, it's good, but there's something important, and the fact is that there's a lot of fake news, there's a lot of false information, and even borderline propagandas about all parties and individuals made up by political extremists. And I think it is crucial for us to be able to judge which information is true or false. So in conclusion, do your due diligence and be a well-informed citizen who can make the right decision when it's the time for you to vote.
Very important, very well said. And that's all we have for today, but Newsden will be back next Monday at 10:30 a.m. Korea time. We're taking tomorrow off as it's Memorial Day here in Korea. Special thanks to Chesa Dainho.
Pleasure's always mine, thank you.
Thank you, and Lee Won-bin.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, and to our viewers, thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next Monday. We are News Generation.
나는 헌법을 준수하고 국가를 보위하며 조국의 평화적 통일과 국민의 자유와 복리의 증진 및 민족 문화의 창달에 노력하여 대통령으로서의 직책을 성실히 수행할 것을 국민 앞에 엄숙히 선서합니다.